Out here, there ain't no free rides. Just two suns beating down on the back of your neck and a whole lot of sand trying to bury you alive. But moisture farmers, well, that don't faze them one bit. They never quit. They wake up before dawn, fire up their trusty vaporators, and squeeze hope out of thin air, just one drop at a time. These men and women, they ain't just working the land, they're fighting back the desert every day, and they're doing it for us. Moisture farming. It's more than a job, it's the backbone of our way of life here on Tatooine. Except that it's not. This profession makes zero sense. Maybe the Hutt cartels want you to think that it makes sense to, farm water out of the air, but if you take a look at the economics, none of this makes any sense. First, these guys aren't even farmers. They're not growing anything, they're not making food, they're just collecting water vapor out of the air, and it's actually a really simple process. It's literally what a dehumidifier does. The one you had in your basement that your parents used to make you clean out at the end of every night. I did that all the time. I didn't walk around town with my chest puffed out saying I'm a moisture farmer. I was a pizza delivery driver. And so why is this even a profession in the first place? And an important profession at that. The entire Skywalker family, the stars of the most important saga and trilogy in Star Wars, come from a long line of moisture. The real reason is really dark, if you kind of understand how all of this works. The way they explain moisture farming on Tatooine in Star Wars is like this. Tatooine is isolated in the Outer Rim. It's an extremely dry and hot planet. It has two suns, right? And despite geographic features like the Tatooine Dune Seas, there's actually no bodies of water on Tatooine. At least there hasn't been in tens of thousands of years. Now, interestingly enough, Tatooine did used to be a tropical planet with oceans, but an ancient evil alien empire enslaved the people of Tatooine, and they kind of rebelled against these evil aliens, and so the aliens glassed their planet Covenant style. Interesting thing happens when you pour enough heat and energy onto the surface of a planet. It does, in fact, turn into glass in some cases. First, the liquids would boil off, oceans, lakes, swamps. Then all the vegetation or organic matter would also be incinerated. And then finally, the surface minerals all melt and liquefy and vitrify into a glassy crust. Over the years, those glassy layers become more brittle. You have volatile fluctuations in temperature thanks to the day and night cycle from this very damaged planet. And so the glass expands and it contracts, it starts developing cracks. And then you have wind from the volatile, storm systems that have been caused by glassing the planet. That brings dust and debris, which further scratches the glass, cracks it, until all the glass is gone, and what you have is sand. A whole lot of sand. Now, unfortunately, this sand is going to be sterile, completely sterile because of the glassing effect. All of the life that did live on the planet was just burnt away, unfortunately. This creates a hellish landscape, a planet-wide desert where life is extremely hard and difficult to sustain, especially on the surface. Now, here's the thing. There are plenty of planets like Tatooine all across the galaxy, planets without natural resources that have a single biome, and, life is sustainable on those planets. People generally don't need to squeeze water out of the air to survive in these places. Take a look at Coruscant. It's a one-biome world, all Duracrete, yet not only does it not have a shortage of water, one could argue you could probably find every liquid you can imagine in the galaxy on Coruscant thanks to the Republic's very robust galactic trade system. Thanks to specialization in the scale of the galactic economy, you have entire worlds that just focus on one thing. You have agricultural planets that just produce crops like Minarau. You have industrial planets like Hutt that just produce ships, and I'm sure there are worlds in the galaxy that just produce tons of water for drinking. Now, thanks to this trade system, it means you can now inhabit planets that don't have all the building blocks for life. Like Tatooine, where you just have breathable atmosphere, but not much food and not much water. Except that's not what really happens on Tatooine. There aren't any huge water shipments coming to the planet. It's not that there isn't trade on Tatooine. All the major settlements have their own spaceports, and there are exports and imports, just no water tankers. And here's the other strange thing. Tatooine's environment is very dry. And that's actually a problem for, evaporation or moisture farming, as you call it. The dehumidifier in your basement probably produces close to 10 liters of water in a day. It's impressive. And that's because the humidity in a basement is generally around 50% or higher. That's basically when my wife's hair starts looking more like Shakira's, and she can't yell at me for saying that because she usually doesn't watch these videos. But the humidity in Tatooine is most likely much lower than 50%. If you take a look at Death Valley, one of the hottest and driest places on Earth, during the day the humidity can go as low as 5 to 10%. At those levels, suddenly your dehumidifier, the one you have in your basement, doesn't really work that well. It might take an entire 24 hours just to produce a liter of water. And you'd be lucky to get that in certain situations. Now, Tatooine has 2 suns, so imagine it's even drier than 5 to 10% humidity, which is why moisture farmers probably use industrial scale vaporators, something that is a bit more complicated and efficient than what we have at home. These machines are probably a lot more expensive and energy intensive, which only adds more cost to this whole operation. It should be noted that if you ever do spend time in the desert at night, it can actually get more humid because the sun disappears, the air gets colder, and cold air is more dense, therefore it can hold more vapor. Plus you get this kind of surface effect as the sands cool, condensation forms, and if there is any vegetation in the deserts of Tatooine, which I believe there are, you might even see some dew form in the early morning. But even if you have these moisture farmers running vaporators 24/7, the economics of this whole situation still doesn't really make that much sense, because you got all the energy costs, plus the machine costs, plus maintenance and whatever other type of overhead you have. You have to hire additional workers, or at least additional droids, and occasionally you have to fight Tusken Raiders or blast Jawas trying to steal your hardware. And so this makes that liter of water you just create out of thin air ridiculously expensive. I mean, it could cost a farmer several credits just for 1 liter of water, which is not really a sustainable product to sell. It's just way too expensive. And so what you have here is a very scarce commodity that is extremely overpriced. I mean, you got water purchasers in the cities who sell directly to the consumer, and they are completely price gouging.
If you're a daimyo, then why'd you let the Monga charge us a month's wages for a week's water?
Now, in a normal situation, when you have ridiculous prices for what is an essential commodity, usually the free market would arrive on the doorsteps of Tatooine. There would be people selling water from other planets. But that doesn't happen on Tatooine. And that's kind of strange, because Tatooine might seem geographically isolated when you're standing on it, but it actually isn't. If we take a look at the local map of the Arcanus sector, you'll notice that just a few parsecs away, you have the planet of Arcanus, which Lonely Planet describes as a relatively temperate planet with a lot of rain. So it is recommended that you wear the proper footwear and have rain gear when you travel to the many craft breweries that are famous on the planet. If I were an enterprising businessman, I would fly to Arcanus, secure a source of water, and buy the largest and cheapest tanker I could fly, and start regular shipments to Tatooine with pure, organic Arcanus water on board. And no matter what the cost of my operation will be, I guarantee you that I will be able to sell water at a much cheaper rate per liter than the moisture farmers can, who are extracting the stuff out of thin air. Just like any other asshole who sells bottled water, I mean, the margins are going to be huge. I think the average bottle of water in convenience stores in America give the sellers like a 35% margin, which is roughly around the same margin Intel gets from selling high-end semiconductor chips. Intel has fallen off a little bit in recent years, but yeah, 35% that's like a high value margin. That's good. I mean, why do you think Fiji, a tiny island with fresh water shortages, is selling idiots like you and me square bottles of water? It's liquid gold. But anyway, my services, my Arcanus water, would be welcomed with open arms by the people of Tatooine. No more paying a month's wages for a week of water. Now you can just buy a 24-pack for less than an hour's wage, right? It's a good deal. Except there is one problem: the Tatooine political system. Why are these street urchins complaining to a daimyo about water prices? Well, that's because there's no legitimate government on Tatooine. It's just a bunch of criminal families and cartels and mafiosos running everything. And the Hutts, well, the Hutts were bigger than any criminal family in the galaxy. Definitely bigger than any criminal organization we've ever seen here on Earth. They not only ran all sorts of different types of businesses and industries, they actually owned massive amounts of territories, including a huge swath of the Outer Rim known as Hutt space. It was the most gabagool ever collected by a single criminal group. Now, this territory has withstood the test of time. It survived the Sith Empire, the Jedi, the Galactic Republic. In Legends, not even the Yuzhang Vong could really destroy them. The Hutts were so powerful that most government entities, most sovereign nations, most xenophobic crusades from another galaxy tended to cut deals with the Hutts instead of trying to fight them. And since they were completely driven by greed and credits, it made the Hutts relatively predictable and, kind of easy to work with in some ways. Now, Tatooine, before the Hutts arrived, was kind of a forgotten planet. We talked about how in ancient times the planet had been glassed. Well, the only people who were really interested in Tatooine because of this fact were a few, mining corporations like Sursica. They're actually the ones who left sand crawlers all over the surface for the Jawas to steal. See, Sursica Corporation found out that the surface of Tatooine, all that sand, had very few valuable minerals in it. It was just all silicate and then more silicate. And so they left. And so basically the planet for most of galactic history was just uninhabited, aside from small pockets of Jawas and Tuskens. But here's the thing, let's go back to that Arcanus sector map. Notice something about Tatooine's location? It's kind of at the crossroads of a few hyperspace lanes, including the Trellis trade route. If we zoom out even more to the galactic map, the Trellis trade route connects Hutt space to many important areas, including the Slice and of course the Corellian Run, one of the most heavily trafficked trade routes in the galaxy. It leads right to the core. Now, if you're smuggling a lot of drugs and weapons illegally, you might think Arcanus is a good place to like base your operations. You know, it's connected to Hutt space through the Trellis route and it's on the Corellian Run. But here's the thing, Arcanus has a huge military and security presence. It always has. This planet loves military academies and creating soldiers, and so yeah, you don't want to be there. But Tatooine is just a hop and a skip away, and it's kind of an ideal place to lay low and base your operations out of. It's a horrible planet, so no one is actually going to fund like a settlement or a group of pioneers to land there. I don't think corporations are interested in it, but you know, the air is breathable and you can kind of just chill there for a little bit. It beats being stuck in a starship for long periods of time. At least you can land, get out, and stretch your legs. And so that's exactly what started happening. Gun runners, drug traffickers, slavers, black market smugglers, anyone associated with illicit trade in this region started calling this place home. Mos Espa and Mos Eisley grew into the settlements they are today because of these rough individuals. Tatooine was basically a truck stop for smugglers. I mean, the entire reason why the Pikes in the Book of Boba Fett are on Tatooine is because of the same reason. They're just running a huge spice smuggling operation and using the planet as a way station of sorts. But that is after Jabba dies from erotic asphyxiation, you know, creating a very large power vacuum. So let's back up from there because we need to go to when the Hutts are still in charge, or before the Hutts get there, because the stench of crime emanating from any location will attract Hutts. And what happened was the Hutts are realizing that, hey, all of these smugglers are gathering on Tatooine. Maybe I want a piece of the action. The Hutt clans came to control the planet Tatooine in the late Republic era, and after some internal fighting, Jabba the Hutt secured ownership of the planet. Now the Hutts, they dabbled in all sorts of things, slaves, spice, gun running, and so it made sense for them to solidify their control over this area. But like any mafia organization, they demanded respect and obedience from their tenants that inhabited their land, and that respect and obedience came in the form of essentially tariffs and taxes, or as they would call it, protection money. Although that didn't mean that Jabba's thugs would protect your farm from, you know, like Jawas and bandits and Tusken Raiders. It just meant that this protection money will protect you from Jabba's thugs from stealing your shit, which oftentimes happened anyway. And so, yeah, everyone had to pay this stupid tax, including the Lars and Skywalker family. I mean, at one point, young Luke was almost killed by a bunch of water tax collectors sent by Jabba. Talk about an anticlimactic ending for a galactic hero. Luckily, Ben Kenobi was there to save the day. So here's the thing, if I actually came with a water tanker to Mos Espa or Mos Eisley, I better come with a huge army of soldiers to help me take out Jabba the Hutt's operations there. Because there's no way that the Hutt won't tax me heavily for bringing that water there. Or, you know, if my theory is right, he might just tell me to turn around and not accept any water shipments at all. Because it's not really about the money. It's actually about controlling the water source on Tatooine. I mean, think about it. We're told that the Hutts control Tatooine, but how often do you actually see their soldiers? How often do you see, you know, airspeeder patrols with like Gamorreans on them? Almost never. And when we do see these soldiers, they're mainly concentrated at Jabba's palace, a heavily fortified and easy to defend location. You see, the Hutts are really smart. They have a long history of enslaving, exploiting what they see as lesser species. So they know how to get into the psychology of the people they're trying to enslave. Instead of taking the Empire's approach to security, you know, a Star Destroyer in every sector, a Stormtrooper on every corner, they say screw it, commit crimes, do illegal things all you want. You're all descendants of criminals anyway. That's why your ancestors came to Tatooine. The Hutts understood the volatile nature of the people that inhabited Tatooine, and they just basically redirected all of their energy into the desert where, you know, the crate dragons could absorb all that chaos. The Hutts were smart to not stand in the way of all that aggression and violence that came from the criminal populace here. The only thing the Hutts really cared about was their share of the economy, the kickbacks. Now Hutt is actually set up exactly like this as well. Zero services, complete chaos, no rules or regulations, and the Hutts just don't care because all they want are the taxes. On Al Hutta, the Hutts had to enforce their rule with an army, and that does cost quite a lot of money. But thanks to Tatooine's natural harshness, all Jabba the Hutt really needs to do is control the source of the water on the planet, and all he needs to do that is just a small number of armed thugs, because Tatooine is sparsely populated. I mean, people weren't going to challenge Jabba the Hutt. Everyone was scared of him. And the beauty of this is no one, even the toughest gangs, can really survive without fluids. Jabba had the entire planet by its balls. He who controls the moisture farms is the moistest, the moist king. And so by not allowing outside water imports onto the planet, we have the creation of this very inefficient and expensive moisture extraction industry. Something that the Hutts control through taxes. Actually, I wouldn't be surprised if they also controlled the sale of evaporators as well on the planet. Now, the moisture farmers of Tatooine could have probably tapped into the groundwater that still existed deep below the surface of Tatooine. As we mentioned before, when those evil aliens glassed the surface of Tatooine, it really was just the surface that got damaged heavily. The reason why there's any life at all on Tatooine is because in the layers below the silicate, there's still, environments that are viable for life. This is how the Tusken Raiders survive in the deep desert. There are fruits and vegetation that thrive because of this groundwater, and the Tuskens guard these places with their lives. And actually, now that I think about it, there's probably another reason why the Hutts didn't just eradicate the Tuskens. They serve as a great guardian for the water supplies beneath the water. If the moisture farmers started to suddenly drill beneath the surface with giant rigs to access cheaper water, the Tusken tribes would definitely unite into some grand crusade to drive them all away. And so again, we're stuck with moisture farming because of the Tuskens' religious beliefs, although in all honesty, they barely even tolerate that. They see all of the waters as all of theirs. And so this is brilliant. Like, the Hutts turn the moisture farmers and the Tusken Raiders against each other, and no one can even connect the fact that the Hutts are behind all of this. And this is really brilliant because this animosity between the Tusken Raiders and the moisture farmers, which is a clear problem, can't really be traced back to the Hutts because the Hutts aren't doing anything. They're just not enforcing their protection. They're not getting rid of the Tuskens. They're allowing them to create problems. And so the Hutts tax the money. But what we see with these taxes is they don't stay consistent. They fluctuate quite a lot. And the reason here is that, again, the Hutts don't really care just about the money. They care about the money, but that's not the end goal. They really just want to control this very vital resource. On a planet like Tatooine, water makes everything happen. If you increase the water taxes, aka take more water for yourself as the Hutt leader, that means the moisture farmers have much less water for themselves. That means less water for Luke and his folks to live on, less water for the bantha that produces the blue milk, and also means less water for selling to the towns which don't produce their own water. If there's less water on the markets, then the water becomes more expensive, leaving a certain percentage of ruffians on Tatooine unable to survive, and so they either die from thirst or they leave. And so if you control the amount of water that is on the markets, you can essentially control the population of the planet. And if you're doing all this illegal, shady stuff on the planet, you might be incentivized to not create a civilization on Tatooine, something that might grow outside of your control or just might cost more money for you to run and operate. The Hutts were ambitious, but they were also very lazy. And so yeah, maybe things are getting too crazy in the core and more criminals are moving out to Tatooine. Well, that's not what the Hutts want. They have an ideal population number, as mentioned, just enough to help them operate their smuggling ventures and not more than that. And so they raise taxes and immigration slows down because the water's too freaking expensive to sustain a larger population. And if the Hutts suddenly need more manpower, what do? They lower the cost of water. They encourage more people to move in and live. Out of all the resources you can weaponize, water is probably the most effective and powerful one. The Hutts are geniuses because they engineered a scarcity in water in a galaxy that is, probably full of like meteorites that are just made up of ice. You could just crash one into the surface of the planet and create an ocean. But yeah, the Hutts are smart. It's actually brilliant evil to control water like this, and it fits right into the lore of what these slugs were like. And you thought Tatooine couldn't get any worse. Well, guys, I hope you enjoyed my little theory. I think it actually connects very well. I'm not sure if Lucas thought of this when he first made the original trilogy, but yeah, like it connects and adds more color to just how much suffering like Luke and his family has to go through in order to survive in this place. Anyway, guys, I hope you enjoyed today's video. Don't forget to subscribe, hit that notification button down below so you don't miss out on the rest of our awesome content. As usual, my name is Alan, reminding you that my allegiance is the Republic, to democracy. I'll see you next time.